Welcome back. Now we're going to start the second section of our course on submitting an academic research paper. We've covered some of the background issues in the previous section. In this section, we're going to start digging into the paper itself and how you start preparing yourself for that. In this first lesson, we're going to discuss 3 basic questions you will ask yourself when writing an academic paper. The first one, what is my paper about? As you start to consider topics for your paper, you really have to consider the question, is what I want to write about worth it? To help you figure that out, you have to put yourself through what we call the so what test. When you're trying to determine if that topic is worth writing about, what are your personal answers to questions like, what will be the contribution of the paper to the field I'm interested in? If I write this paper, how will it change the way academics see my field? What can I bring to the table that hasn't been said before in those terms? And to help you find those answers, you need to make sure and build your own knowledge base with a solid review of current literature. It's vital to know what your contribution may be to your field of interest. So, after you have an idea what your paper might be about, next comes question 2. How do I ensure that my presentation is of interest to others in my field? Just like in the first question, when you asked yourself, so what, this question helps make sure you're passing the so what test for others. This part of writing a paper is as scientific as it is political. Be sure the vocabulary you use in the frame of your proposition is current with the way the reviewer understands the issue you're raising. To ensure that, identify colleagues and members of your network that can help you position the paper in the terms you've chosen. As we previously talked about, this is another time when your scientific community comes into play, and why it's important to develop one. Finally, the third question you have to ask yourself is, what kind of paper do you want to write? Academic papers can have different goals, and the design of your paper will be different depending on if your goal is a theoretical one, an empirical one, or a methodological one. As the contributions and names of these papers are different, so will be the setting, the methodologies, and the resource questions. Your final product will be impacted by this orientation. For instance, you may be looking to publish a paper in a management journal like the Harvard Business Review, which is oriented towards industry professionals as well as academics. That journal will not be looking for the same contribution as a pure academic-oriented journal. For that submission, they may be looking for industrial or corporate change, even though the topic of your publication can be the same for both. All these questions and elements you should be considering are linked to a very important element of your paper called the research question. The research question is the main question raised in your paper, and the one you bring elements of an answer to through your work and published results. Identifying the research question for your paper will be the focus of this entire section of our course. Identifying it and staying focused on it is extremely important as you start reviewing other published literature. And, by the way, that process of reviewing and researching and preparation for actually writing the paper is called literature review, and we'll begin to explain what that means in more detail in the next lesson. For now, remember that the 3 questions we've just discussed in this lesson have to be kept in mind when you're building your research question and going through that literature review. They ensure that what you write is still coherent and in line with what you set out to do. To recap, those 3 questions are, what is my paper about? How do I ensure that my presentation passes the so what test for others? And what kind of paper do I want to write? As you go through all of this process, don't forget, the goal you're pursuing in developing your paper is twofold. First, you're aiming to build a coherent reasoning through the paper. Second, you have to position your paper so that it's accepted by the community of researchers you've chosen to address. So, to conclude, you have to understand your field, you have to know what you can contribute to this field, and you have to know how to communicate your contribution to the academic community. To get you started on that, as I mentioned briefly a few minutes ago, the next lesson is going to go more deeply into how to build your own review of literature in your field and your specific domain of study.